Andrew is off tonight, but Bruce and Chantel are here, and so are two of our favorite Ottawa correspondents, Althea Raj of Huffington Post Canada and John Ivison of the National Post. All right, Tom Mulcair decides to take on the oil sands, suggesting that certain job losses in central Canada can be blamed on the booming energy sector. Here's what he said to Evan Solomon on CBC Radio's The House, followed by reaction from Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall.
It's by definition the Dutch disease. The Canadian dollar is being held artificially high, which is fine if you're going to Walt Disney World, not so good if you want to sell your manufactured product because the American client, most of the time, can no longer afford to buy it. We've hollowed out the manufacturing sector. At the present time, the way we're exploiting and developing the oil sands is causing an imbalance in our economy. That's demonstrable.
But I think it's very, very divisive for someone who aspires to be the Prime Minister to label a certain sector of our economy that's actually creating jobs, potash and uranium and oil, creating jobs through exports and through their development for all of the country, that he would label that as a problem is very disconcerting.
All right. What do we do make of this dust-up, Chantal?
Well, Thomas Mulcair is trying to lay out a different economic path from the Conservatives, and that is where the next election will be fought, the economy, that he will have an audience for comments that seem negative about the oil sands, certainly in Quebec, and most likely in British Columbia, where a battle royale is coming over pipelines, and possibly in Ontario, if the perception builds that the Harper government is all about oil sands, i.e. Western Canada, when Ontario is ailing.
Now, so you think it's a strategic political move on his part?
Yes, and I also don't think that he has much of a choice. Many pure New Democrats feel that he's already softened up the language of the party about the oil sands. He's not saying shut down the oil sands, but he is certainly positioning himself as a different, he would call it more balanced. Others would have other opinions on that.
Bruce?
Well, I disagree, I guess. I think that it was a serious political misstep for Mr. Mulcair. My sense is that to characterize the oil sands in any way as a disease affecting the Canadian economy, which is how many people, I think, interpreted his remarks, is going to be tough for him to carry forward. I think he's going to be amending those remarks, clarifying them. Lord Nystrom came out today and suggested almost as much.
The former NDP MP.
That's right, and his campaign co-chair, as I remember, in terms of his leadership. I mean, he's got a party that's at 34% in the polls. There's probably only about 15% of Canadians who would agree with the way that he articulated his position, including not very many union members. There are a lot of union jobs around the oil sands as well.
John, what do you make of it?
Well, it's kind of strange. I don't think it augurs very well for an NDP recovery on the prairies. They only have one MP there at the moment in Alberta. But he obviously calculates that, so there's nothing to lose. We may gain in Ontario and Quebec. It's kind of strange, though. I think, internalising the oil sands costs, internalising some of those pollution costs, that's one thing. But saying you're deliberately going to try and hit the profits of these companies to bring down the value of the dollar so that you're going to help manufacturing in the rest of the country, that's a lot of moving parts. And I don't think anybody could with any confidence, say what would happen if they did that.
Well, he's not really actually saying that. But I agree with Chantal.
Well,
I think it is.
But is that the end product of what he's saying?
I don't think he's saying that. I think he is playing directly to people in southern Ontario. I think he's playing to those union members who could be lured away from the Conservatives to the NDP. And I think it is definitely a strategy. BC, cement, Alberta, a little bit out west. He mentioned New Brunswick in that interview, southern Ontario, and also the west in urban ridings. Like, they are shut out of Saskatchewan. They have 32% of the vote, or they had 32% of the vote there, and they had no seats. But Saskatchewan has pie-shaped ridings that are going to change, and they will definitely be, at least an urban riding in Regina and an urban riding in Saskatoon when the Electoral Boundary Commission sorts everything out in 2015. So they might still be able to pick up some seats.
And they might not need them. The play is Ontario, and this government has put its cards on the table in the budget, and its cards say prosperity for the foreseeable future would be created through natural resources. That doesn't really play to Ontario's strengths. So it's a gamble. In 4 years, if Ontarians feel that they're doing better than today, it may come up roses for the government. If they don't, though, they might come to the perception that this is a government that is a Western Canada driven government that didn't really care about the industrial base of Ontario. And for all the talk about union members, very few union members in southern Ontario feel a lot of warmth from the notion that the oil sands are doing well.
Do you want to take another crack at this? We should say that you have done some work from the oil industry, and especially in Alberta. You spent a lot of time in Alberta.
Continue to, yes. I guess I look at it a little bit differently, in part because I think this is maybe the first opportunity that Tom Mulcair has had to speak about how he sees the economy. And as statements about economic policy go, I don't think it's all that articulate. I don't think it'll be all that persuasive, even to people in southern Ontario who may feel some jealousy almost sometimes about the economic spoils that are accruing in Western Canada. I think a lot of people will say almost what Brad Wall alluded to, which is, does this mean that your only policy for economic growth is a low dollar? Is that really a policy for economic growth that will affect everybody for the better?
But the counterpoint is your only industrial strategy equalization from the West to Ontario. And that is not an industrial strategy. And the problem with the Conservatives is that they do have thoughts on that, but the emphasis is on something else, in part because of the environmental dismantling. And I think Mulcair is taking advantages of being the critic of the government.
But I agree with Bruce. I mean, it's not a recipe for future success to impoverish everybody by reducing our purchasing power, by reducing the dollar. I think there was a survey this week that looked at Ohio and Michigan, which have gone through a similar experience, which suggests that it's not just the currency rate which dictates how your manufacturing industry is going to go. All had gone from somewhere around 25% of all jobs in the manufacturing down to about 12 or 9. You know, I think this is a very dangerous policy playing one part of the country against another. I think we saw that with Pierre Trudeau's National Economic Energy Plan. Right. It just doesn't sit well with me anyway.
Okay, let me move it to another element of this debate that's going on, which I think we all agree is right now playing out to be the debate that's going on in the country on the national political level. And that's the way the Conservatives, the government, have been attacking the wealthy foreign donors using environmental charities in Canada to get their message across against the oil sands. Look at this list the Canadian Press came up with. After that charge, which has been going on for a couple of months, the Canadian Press went and did some actual work to find out, well, okay, well, who are these top foreign-funded charities? Well, look at them. CARE Canada, World Vision, McMaster University. I guess the Conservatives don't have any cabinet ministers in Hamilton. They'd be worried about this list. Ducks Unlimited is number 5, and that's the closest you can come to an organization that is concerned about conservation or environmental issues. Althea, you've done a lot of work on this story as well. What's going on here?
Yeah, Ducks Unlimited. Well, I mean, it's also a group that sets up wetlands so that hunters can go and kill animals, right? So let's put that in perspective.
Yeah, but yes, it's a little more complicated than that, to be fair to Ducks Unlimited.
True. Yeah, this is all about discrediting the opposition, right? It started off with a natural resource minister saying all environmental protesters are radicals. Then we had a Senate inquiry with Senator Nicole Eaton standing up and saying she was going to promise information that was going to make her blood boil, followed up by Senator Donald Plett, former Conservative Party president, who accused environmental groups of being willing to take money from Martians and Al-Qaeda. Then we had the environment minister suggesting that there were American super PACs at work in Canada, and now recently that charities are laundering money in this country. I mean, it's starting to be ridiculous, and I think it is actually hurting their message.
Is it ridiculous, or is any of this being proven to be true, or turn up with lists like this one?
Well, they do. Some groups do take money from big American philanthropy foundations, that sort of stuff. David Suzuki Foundation has about 6% of its funding from foreign sources. They are active in this country, but it's not like the Steel Hunt, for example, where most of the anger is coming from abroad and Hollywood types and Brigitte Bardot and Paul McCartney suggesting that these people are anti-Canadian and hurting an industry. Most people who give to these groups are Canadian, and while we're talking about the funding of charities, we're not talking about the message from environmental groups, which is this government is gutting environmental assessments in the budget, that they're redefining what a fish is. You know, instead of talking about the issues, we're being distracted by the charity.
Okay, so has the government gone too far on this, John?
Well, the oil sands are a world-class play, and so you've got environmental groups being funded from abroad, but equally the companies are being funded from abroad. There was a survey came out today that said that 25%
from abroad.
25% of companies are controlled from abroad. 16% of all investment in the last 7 years has come from China. So, it does sound a little. What it speaks to is the Conservative strategy of never retreat, never apologise, never explain, always attack and let them howl. And I think that on the environmental file, they are going to potentially pay the price if they don't start putting out some olive branches. In the way that the Alberta government is starting to do. The Alberta government has started to talk about the need for a social licence. We need to act perhaps more responsibly. Otherwise, the dirty oil, Canada as an environmental laggard image is going to stick, and at some point it's going to mean a premium price for any oil we export.
Bruce?
Well, I think with this move, the government has created a sideshow that's unhelpful to its agenda of regulatory overhaul. I think it's one thing if the government wants to say we need less but better regulation. I think a lot of Canadians are open-minded to that idea, but only open-minded to the extent that they trust the motives of the government. And I think the government in this move looked like it wasn't really trying to find less and better regulation by auditing the activities of these groups, but instead fewer and quieter dissenting voices. And I think if that continues to be the image that's left as a consequence of this initiative, it's going to backfire for the government.
But then what choice do they have? Because usually if you're going to take on the environmental movement, then it is a global movement with a lot of credibility. And if it doesn't have it here, it will have it where your customer base is going to be, and that's going to hurt too. And we saw that with the Great Whale project, the hydro project in Quebec, which died with American consumers, but it did die. The way to counter that usually is to build some credibility on the environmental front so that you come to this discussion as someone who is also, well-minded on the environment. This government is a huge credibility gap on the environment, so their only defense and preemptive defense is to try to undermine the credibility of their future critics.
Okay, let me just show you something that was in the New York Times today. This person who wrote this op-ed piece in the New York Times does not come without controversy, but he nevertheless is NASA's top climatologist. He writes, President Obama said, and I think he said it in a Rolling Stone interview, that Canada would exploit the oil in its vast tar sands reserves regardless of what we do. If Canada proceeds, this is Hansen now speaking, if Canada proceeds and we do nothing, it will be game over for the climate. So the international tension continues. John, you wanted to make a point. Well,
he goes on to say that it's almost the end of civilization. I mean, it was a pretty doomsday article. He's noted for writing this type of stuff, and he's an eminent scientist, but he's also he was arrested outside the White House last year. Yeah, I guess my point is
just shows that both sides can play the heavy card, and the outrageous card at times, perhaps, right?
I guess my point would be that, so the government has been on the attack, but at the same time, it's very hard to do business with groups, including Greenpeace. Now, there have been areas, such as on the boreal forest, where industry and even Greenpeace, its harshest critics, have come together and come up with an action plan. And I wrote recently about this, and I asked Greenpeace, could you do something similar on the oil sands? Well, there is no room for compromise as far as the hardline environmentalists are concerned on the oil sands.
You got a last word on this one, Althea?
Well, I don't really think it's only the hardline environmentalists who don't want to compromise. I think this government doesn't want to compromise with them either. So, you need two people to tango.
Bruce?
Well, I look at this, and the thing that's missing for me in this analysis is the role that consumers, that all of us play if we're driving vehicles that consume fossil fuels. To imply that Canada is going to do what it's going to do to the planet, irrespective of what American consumers do, feels like it's telling really only part of the story. At the end of the day, these products are only getting developed because people are using them, demanding them, and maybe America could change its procurement policy, but the rest of the world is looking for these products too.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that for this week. Good discussion. Thank you, John. Thank you.